the YouTube algorithms are pushing them, and then you see like what they're doing, and you go, okay, they're doing pretty much the same stuff that a lot of other people are doing. They're following the trend. So if you follow the trend and quote the same books that everybody else is quoting and say the same things and follow the same line of thinking, you really get like pushed up. It's very interesting how the algorithm has been set to sort of target free thinking. And I think that ties into what you're saying with the Magians, the Magian cosmology, Silas.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They don't want anything that's of a divergent condition or kind. So I remember doing a social experiment on my YouTube channel where if you look at the most popular videos on my YouTube channel, it's basically like what you're saying. I was following a trend, right, on video games. And it actually started out, it didn't start out as a social experiment. It was just a video game that I'd long enjoyed, and it had become, well, basically completely hollowed out. It looked like it was generated by AI. So I did a video on it, and, you know, of course it was quite dramatic. I was quite vitriolic, right, because I was angry. So again, that was pushed. It seems it got, I think, 10,000 views or 11,000 views or something over the span of like less than 2 weeks, and of course the next videos that I made were more in line with what I usually do, and then it started to taper off. The algorithmic reach started to taper off. So yeah, it's all based around short form content. That if it's long form content, it has to hinge upon drama of some kind. It has to reel you in. It has to almost take from you your time, your energy, all of that. This is the sort of Ahrimanic labyrinth that has been developed, and it's something we have to break forth from. We have to break forth from the mold, and I guess that would be the more Magian view and path to take, as opposed to the Faustian, which is to literally merge with the machine, to fall into the machines of our own creation, and to lose our souls in the process. So we're in a great battle. I mean, as I stated, the war for our physical domain, our bodies, and that was won long ago. Now we're in a great war for our spirit, for the very spirit of humanity, for our humanity itself, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, we are at proverbial war. It's a war for our thoughts, it's a war for the mind. And so it sort of brings me into this idea of like the inner child. So education systems is essentially designed to prevent us from having spiritual awakening. And I equate spiritual awakening to the recognition of that inner child within us, which is the innate, what the Taoists call the uncarved block, what the yogis and the Vedic scholars would call the enlightened state, what Western cosmology would relate to as the prince, the crowned child, or the child on the throne, whichever cosmology you like to go with. I think that this is really what the whole education system is about, is stealing our childhood. And I noticed as a child, they were trying to steal my childhood away from me. And I felt quite offended when I was like a young, gosh, how old was I? I was actually talking to my girlfriend about this last night. So when I was 10, I did some naughty things in my school. Hey, I think it was 27 Windows naughty, and take apart the phone lines, take apart all the phones in the school. Those days we had like phones, actual phones. Got into the office, got hold of the keys, got hold of all of the teachers, all the keys for the rooms, went into the filing cabinets in the office, got out all the paperwork, all of this children's schoolwork, ran around and basically made a shuffled pack of paperwork throughout the entire corridor system of the school while disabling the phones, disabling everything we could disable. And that was like really because we were sitting talking one day and I started complaining to these guys. I said, like, I don't like this idea of school. They're like messing with our minds. They're trying to control us. They're trying to control what we think. They're trying to control what we believe. They seem to be talking a lot of nonsense a lot of the time. And my friend Nicholas Falmore, he was like, yeah, I'm with you. And Peter Venn was with us and he was like, you're completely right. And one of them stood up in anger and put the foot through a window, up the damn straight. Like the next thing we were all doing it. And we just went into a frenzy. But I think there's this innate knowledge in children that something's off. And so we ask ourselves why the children don't want to go to school, right? Why do the children have, especially in this day and age, there's a lot of this neurodiversity, and a big part of the neurodiversity is children not being able to go to school. Like they're not coping at school. They go to school and the wheels fall off because on some innate unconscious level, they feel the need to protect themselves from this bombardment, psychic bombardment that's preventing them from being a child, an inner child. What do you guys think about that whole process?
I'll let you jump in, Chris, if you want.
Actually, Silas, you start because there's something I'm going to come in with Steiner, but I want to make sure that I have it correct.
Yeah. So I think this idea of the child as well, and you even see that of the child of the egg and the filius philosophorum and the Western tradition. Of course, it appears as well within the various Dharmic traditions too, and even in the Mesopotamian traditions with Demuzid and Tammuz and all of this. But this notion is it's almost the principle of preservation, because the inner child is that which is intuitive. Children have not been bombarded with the cultural milieu, with the cultural programming. They haven't been conditioned as adults have. Though adults have this hubris because they're older, they're somehow wiser. Of course, even idiots grow old, right? So this idea of the inner child really is that they see through the illegitimate nature of the systems of power, of the structures of control. And I mean, that's why they want the confines of the urban shell, and they want to maintain it incessantly. This is the idea behind the world egg or the Orphic egg. The snake, the systems of power, coil themselves round, of course, 4 times, relating to the 4 elements, meaning that we're completely controlled and curtailed and reined in vis-a-vis the material world, consumerism, vapid, this vapid idea or lifestyle of keeping up with the Joneses, all of this idea. And they don't want us to introspectively go into, to gain sustenance from, I guess, the solar yoke, which is the fire which is inside of us, inside of that egg, and then to burst forth from the egg. So they want to keep us in this sort of perpetually adolescent state, but one that is completely controlled, it's completely enmeshed in the cultural fabric and the cultural milieu and the systems of power and the conditioning. So the inner child really is this innocence that it sees through it all, right? It sees what these systems are, that they're just illegitimate, that their status itself is illegitimate. So I think that's what the inner child is. And of course, once the cycle ends, that is the point of preservation, because we go back to nature, which is that same sort of childlike innocence. And then perhaps the cycle begins anew.
Yeah. And it's interesting too because so a lot of what Steiner says about what's coming with the eighth sphere is a separation from basically the soul. And it's not only a separation from the soul, it's a separation from the higher soul and the identity that comes with that. And you could see it in the lack of identity that the children everywhere have. I mean, they don't even know what biological sex they are, let alone who they are. I mean, I think honestly, we're probably seeing a lot of individuals who are developing into egoless beings, as Steiner wrote about. They have no self-identity already. And that just makes them extremely psychopathic as they keep getting older. And it's almost exactly like Silas was saying before you came back on, is the psychopaths are producing more psychopaths. I mean, and that just helps them atomize them and makes them into cogs in the machine. And they don't have a problem with that. They're not going to have a problem with that. That's going to be the big problem that we're going to have, because most people won't have a problem with it.
Something to mention as well, just really quickly. Sorry, Franklin. It's almost like what the Enlightenment thinkers like Locke was talking about, that everyone is a tabula rasa. Well, of course, that's not the case. No one is born as a tabula rasa, a blank canvas, a blank slate. But of course, if they believe that, then they will simply bring that into being. They will manifest it. So, like what you're saying, these egoless beings, they have no rudder. They're not the helmsman. The ego in semiotic terms is linked with the boat. So if you don't have a boat, if you don't have an ego, there's no way you can navigate the meanderings of the great cosmic river of the Eridanus. So you're lost at sea, right? And it's strange as well, because my new book, I go into the Asuras, and I link it with, well, there is there's several Indian historians that link this with the Asuras and the Nagas, with these this ancient merchant elite that was kicked out of India. And perhaps that links with the Zoroastrian inversion with the Ahuric triad. But they mention that they were a great naval power and maritime power, and then we obviously have maritime law and all of this as well, tying in with that. But it's strange because the water is something you link with the feminine, but they seem to totally demonize the feminine. So it's quite strange. I think there's been inversions. Firstly, they have a sort of inverted mindset itself, but there's been inversions at every single stage of the game. Yeah.
Well, Steiner had the Asuras as evil entities that came pretty much prior to Ahriman. That would basically separate everyone's consciousness from the identity in the I. There would be no more I.
Yes. Yeah. It's weird as well, because when I was looking into that, and I think it was Steiner that mentioned this, I wrote this ages ago in the book, but he mentioned something about the Asuras linking with Ushra. Ushra, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which means dawn. So I think that's in Sanskrit, or it might be Avestan, Persian. And it's interesting because obviously the Asuras, I don't know if it's the same in Hinduism, but in Buddhism, they get drunk and they fall from Mount Meru. They try to climb to Mount Meru, they fall from it. So there's this sort of idea of the fallen angels as well, right, that you see in the Abrahamic tradition. But it mentions, I think it's in the Old Testament, no, it might be the New Testament, where it's mentioned that, Lucifer, or morning star, son of the dawn, how ye have fallen from heaven. Obviously, if we link the morning star with the east and the dawn, then of course Ushra, which either means dawn or east as well, the same word, because obviously the dawn is on the east. It must be talking about the Asuras in a very remote or distant manner. So it's interesting because the Lucifer concept or the Prometheus concept, both of them are very similar. In Sumeria, it was the Anzu who stole the tablet of destinies. That means heavenly owl, which is why the owl is so important to them as well as a symbol. It must be speaking about this idea of like a reset. They control the resets. You see that with the Splendor Solace. You see that with the likes of the Tarot deck. The sun goes through this underworld. It falls into the underworld, but from this underworld, this chthonic realm, it will then meet the horizon, the dawn on the east, and then the dawn will come up. So they have this idea. It's all this sort of symbolism, but yeah, linking back to the inner child, they would view that as a sort of phoenix or as an inner child, or even from the Egyptian mindset, the phoenix was not just a symbol of rebirth, but it was also an allotment of time. It was a measure of time. The Flammarion, it also goes by another term, and I forget it now, but it's the same sort of concept. The Bennu bird, which links to the Ben stone, the capstone. So it's the bird of the capstone. All of that is interlinked with this. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, and I can't get a receipt on it, but my memory serves that Anshu had been the one who had voted to go to Mars with Hallelujah. His name just keeps coming back. I just can't escape it. So Alalu had come to Earth, and Alalu at a later stage had challenged Anu to a second battle, wanting the crown here on Earth. And Anu basically cleaned his clocks for him. Cleaned his clocks right fair and square, because the battles were done by kings naked, right? And then Anshu, Alalu, in a fit of rage, bites off one of Anu's gonads, right? Bites the thing right off, spits it out on the floor. And they were like, we should put this guy down. But they couldn't put him down because of his royal lineage, right? So they banish him to Mars. So it is Anshu, if I remember correctly, I think he was a pilot. He volunteers to go to Mars and look after Alalu until he passes. And he goes to Mars and he looks after Alalu. And when Alalu passes, Anshu is there, and he makes this face on Mars. So they mention that in the tablets. He constructs the face of Alalu on Mars. That's the face we can see to this day. And then the Ijiji are brought out later to Mars because the Ijiji were needed on Mars. Now, the Ijiji are the Grigori of the ancient Greeks. And these are the fallen angels. These are the Nephilim from the Bible, the same group of entities. So Anshu was then in charge of the Ijiji, and he kept petitioning for them to come to Earth. He was like, it's not right. These Ijiji living on Mars. It's really crappy living on Mars, man. They should come to Earth. And the aristocratic class of the who I like to call the Atlanteans were, no, we don't want them here, because the Ijiji were considered to be, I think, as tall as 30 to 40 cubits. That's like 30 to 40 feet tall. They were like huge. And the aristocratic class were like 10 to 14 cubits tall. So there's a considerable difference in size. So they didn't want the Ijiji coming to Earth because there were 200 of them, right? They specify the number 200, the same as in the ancient Greek scrolls. Same, like wherever you look, it's 200. So, and in the Book of Giants, it's also comes back to the 200 angels, fallen angels. So anyway, my point that I'm trying to tie together here is that Anshu then comes to Earth, and I believe he came to Earth wanting to get the Ijiji to come to Earth, but it wasn't being allowed. And then he came up with an idea. He thought, if I steal the tablets of destiny, I will be the most powerful being here on Earth. So they won't be able to stop me from bringing the Igigi here, and then I would rule Earth, right? So he
Mhm.
steals tablets from Enki's tower because Enki had this great tower on Earth, this huge tower where he kept the tablets safe.
Yeah.
And then he is vanquished by one of Enki's other sons. I forget his name. Um, anyway, but the son that went off later on to the far lands of the south, I think South America, I think the one who became Quetzalcoatl in our histories. Anyway, he goes,
Oh,
he managed.
Ninurta. Was it Ninurta?
Sorry,
Ninurta, I think.
Ninurta was a lady. Ninurta, I think, was Enki's sister. Was she
Yeah,
sister?
maybe. Maybe I think I'm getting mixed up. Yeah. Yep.
Ninurta, I think, was. But anyway, one of his sons manages to vanquish him using clever tactics, and he was very powerful in the magics, and he was able to cleverly use a deceptive technique to overwhelm Anshu. Okay, so now Anshu, I believe, was the only one that was ordered to be put out.
Mm.
Yeah, to be put down. Like that, these beings weren't quick on having someone put down. But the theft of those tablets they were the most sacred thing on earth, right? And the theft of those tablets was like high treason. So he was put down because he didn't have that royal lineage that Alalu had to do high treason and get away with it. So he was put down. And so I find it interesting that we now have the Ashura, right? Ashura. And then we've got the Anshu. I'm finding a linguistic connection there. The fact that he was the one on Mars that was actually managing the Igigi. So he was the one who wanted to bring the fallen angels to Earth. He was like their king, in a sense, because he was their champion. And so he gave his life. Would they have honored him? Him going to Earth and giving his life so that they could, like, basically risking life and limb in order for them to come to Earth. They would have honored this guy like a great king. They might have even called themselves Anshu, Ashura. You see, the Ashura. I find it interesting that there's that linguistic connection between the one who came to try and ensure that the fallen angels would be back on Earth, or the Ashuras, or the
Mhm.
Igigi, or the Grigori, with the same people we're speaking about in the different languages we track it. So I just find that interesting. There seems to be that linguistic connection, and the N could have been dropped off quite easily to become Ashura, you know. So that's very interesting, and I think like these things that we're talking about happened long before Sanskrit or Persian
Yeah.
were even thought of. So these languages would have sort of developed, and we can see how, like, over time, maybe the pronunciation of the name would have been a bit different, and the N would have
Oh
been
yeah.
pronounced that way.
Well, you even see it with Syria, which was known as Surya or Shurya. I think Surya means to in Sanskrit it means to shine or something along those lines, or it's linked to the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you even see that as well with the A prefix has been taken away there. Even the Asurya, which may be another etymological.
It's like as you
origin
rise or
point.
as you shine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or the A, well, no, the A would be the negative prefix, so it would be like the black sun almost. That idea.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it obviously it's linked to the sun and
Oh yeah, like
these
anti-shine.
ideas.
Yeah, no, you're right. It'd be like an anti-shine.
That's interesting though about the Anshu. I thought it was pronounced Anzu, but if it's pronounced Anshu, that is a glaring connection there. That's quite brilliant. Yeah, I think Anshu also went by the term, or it became syncretized with this deity called Abu. which literally means father pasture or father of the pasture. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It was also syncretized with Ninurta, which is the god of the barley. And yeah, I think Enki's sister was Ningursag or Ningurshaga, which is very similar to Ninurta. I think they were both Saturnian. Ninurta was Saturn, essentially. That was the name they used for Saturn as well.
It's interesting you say that, because Steiner has the Ashuras as being leftover entities from the age of Saturn.
Oh,
they were like
right.
those who refused to continue in the evolution, the path of evolution that consciousness was on. So they're actually even higher entities of evil than the Ahrimanic and Luciferic, because I don't know if it's because they're older, because of they've had more time to develop in the stream of consciousness. I don't know what the answer to that is, but he does connect them to Saturn.
Sorry for that error. I think you're right, Ninurta. I don't know why I thought Ninurta was the lady, but you're completely right. I think this is one of the forms of the names of the other guy that I was talking about. I think there's a couple of these different name forms in different places that you'll find, which is quite confusing. And then they change it again in the Akkadian scripts, right? So they take it one level further in the Akkadian. But I think, you guys, this is really interesting, because like bringing it back to Abba or Abu, that sort of takes us right into the Shemite tradition. Now we look at Shemite, right? So we're continually looking at the this Shah, the Shem, which is related to the fiery beings. Now, there are these ancient legends about these fiery beings, which are considered the holy creatures from one perspective. But when you go to another side of the perspective, the watery beings are considered the divine beings. Isn't that interesting? And so we're playing that dichotomy once again with like Ashura in Persia were the good guys, right? But in and the Devas were the bad guys in the Persian stories. But when you go to India, it's reversed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The Devas were the good guys and the Ashuras were the bad guys. So we've got this very interesting juxtaposition running here. And on different sides of the planet, it seemed like there was different factions. And they were like opposed to each other. And everybody thought they were the good guy. Isn't that interesting? We see this pattern.
You know what's interesting too? I'm reading here that even back when Steiner was lecturing, he had already connected the Ashuras to both plasma and dark matter, which dark matter obviously isn't correct in its the hypothesis of what it is. It's really like an etheric plasma of energy sort of form, but that's what he was like, it's a dark light, he's calling it, basically.
Very, very Stephen King-like, isn't it? With I think they're called the dark lights, isn't it? With the Pennywise and it, yeah.
Yeah, and not just the light, obviously, because it is a form of matter, so it's like a dark plasma or a dark fire.
Mm-hmm.
They basically are like the black sun.
Well, this is... Oh, sorry, Franklin, please. Oh, I was just going to say really quickly, it's like the jinn as well in the Islamic tradition, which I remember when I came across that concept, I couldn't understand it. They're beings of smokeless fire. I'm like, how can that be? But like what you're saying, it's this paradox of the dark light, this notion. So it's almost like what you're saying, Franklin. It's these two opposing forces that have perhaps they make up, or they've woven themselves into the very fabric of our psyche, and we're having this cosmic battle upon the microcosm of Mundus, right, of the world. So it's quite interesting.
And we could also equate to be obsessed with the Great Mother is to be Luciferian, and to be obsessed with the Great Father is to be
Ahrimanic.
His name? Ahrimanic, yeah, because the great father is all about the law and the structure. Everybody follow the law. Everybody be. The great mother is all about the, expansiveness, just just being yourself kind of thing. So that sort of personal identity, which I think epitomizes Luciferian thinking, as in like the I presence, where the Aramanic is sort of taking us to the we presence, right? You're either we or you're I. Aramanic, there's no I, like there's just we. And that's quite an interesting concept, that the singularity of the Father takes us under control of Big Brother, yeah, towards this sort of, we see this in the world. The whole world's constructed around this fatherly archetype, and the mother has been like, she's been stomped into the earth, because the mother wants to just let the children be, right? The father wants to teach the children. Isn't that like a typical thing that you come across? Like, my son's mother doesn't know how to discipline my son at all. So he goes wild, and he doesn't know where to draw the line. And I will. And please, can you close the door? I'm in a live. Please don't talk to me now. I know what you want, and I'm going to do it. Thank you. So,
My mama said sometimes she would buy 50 for me.
Josh, I love you, but can I do this live, please, my boy?
My mama said my roll free pick.
I'm going to ask a second time, and I want to take action. Please close the door, and please don't disturb me again. Thank you, my boy. So, see what I mean? There's an example of it. I'm going to ask a second time, then I'm going to take action. Action involves tablet. It disappears. Internet gets controlled. There's no YouTube. There's no nothing. There's no Disney Pluses. She doesn't know how to do this with him. And I think it's a typical thing where the fathers are always dispensing discipline, like disciplining the situation, because we understand discipline as men, don't we? Like in a way that maybe women, their hearts are so open. Oh, it's my little baby. Like, he can't do anything wrong. We're like, no, that's not cool. To the point where mommy comes crying to daddy if the child does something wrong. Look what he did. It's like, got to go discipline him. Like they lack the not all women, but it's more of a man thing to discipline a child. And I think so this whole disciplining us is that masculine force, and they want to keep us away from the feminine nurturing potential, because the nurturing potential is just like, it's like a bit of soil. It's like grow like a seed, right? Grow like a seed. And the father's up there saying, no, you're going into a scrog, buddy. We want to maximize the yield, to turn it into green talk. So why does everybody who grow in scrogs? Because they want to maximize the yield. The mother, she's just like, grow. Like, the yield doesn't matter. Just grow. Just reach your potential. So that's very interesting how we've been sort of culturally entrained from this motherly principle within us, which I think relates to wisdom and knowledge on a deep level. What do you guys think? Or understanding, probably a better way to put it.
Oh no, absolutely. You even see it, for example. So you have that expansionism in the very sort of liberal free spirit of the feminine. This is why the feminine is linked with the likes of Tiamat or the Teom, the abyss, because the abyss is deep, it's vast, right? It, like what you're saying, it's expansive, but it's also salt water, because too much of that expansion can lead to the likes of the Mahakala. This idea where she goes on this sort of blood frenzy. So you have this, it can, the mother can be very loving, but she can also be, it can be very destructive. That love, that sort of the instilling of that expansion can be quite corrosive as well, if you don't have, like what you're saying, the complementary and sort of equal reactionary force of the male, which is based around, not a tyrant, but it's based around this principle of limitation, that you're limiting things, you're sort of reining it in, controlling it. So absolutely, that's written in archetypally and psychologically into the religions and into the various motifs of religion and mythology and all of that.
And I love that you brought up Steiner as well. I think like Steiner's been priming. Steiner, shall we call him primer? He primed us for like what's to come. And a lot of like what he said seems to be like really on point. And I think like it also is ancient prophecies as well. Because I've come across these ideas in other places, you know, like you talk about the Kali Yuga, for example, in the Vedic tradition. They speak about how in the Kali Yuga people will become soulless, effectively. And we will become like the Asuras.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, brother.
Yeah. It's there's actually, the more you listen to his lectures and read them, or read them, listen to them, or whatever you want to do with Steiner, the more, like, because there's so much, but the more you see that he was totally on point about this topic, in the very least, about what's coming next for humans and the age that we're currently in, and what's going to happen via the technological progress we are attempting to make as a society, or we're blindly going to be making. Like, he was spot on. And the one thing it's weird because he says something about the Bible that I just found out the other day, about the Genesis, where it's in the beginning was the word. In the beginning, what is the line I'm looking for? In the beginning was the word, and blah 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 blah. Someone do their one of you two.
The word was the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like the first sentence in Genesis. But he says there's a reason it says was the word. Because the word no longer is, he says. Mm-hmm. And I never had thought of it that way. You know, I would always thought of it like, oh, it's a thing like, oh, the word is you manifest via the word. That's why that's there. I mean, this is a very new age thing that's been applied to Christianity through the mysteries and whatnot. But it makes sense because everything's frequency and vibration. But he's like, no. You have to stop thinking of it like that. Because if you keep thinking of it like that, you're going to fall right into the Ahrimanic. Because the whole thing about the Ahrimanic is that through your words, you can manifest whatever you want. It's going to be like a magic trick that everyone falls for. You have to feel it. He starts saying, it's basically like Tenet. Like that's immediately I thought of Tenet. He's basically like, you have to feel what you're going to manifest in the future, what you want to come to you. You have to feel basically like the correct morality, the correct spirit. You feel it. It's not something you can manifest via your words anymore in this age. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he also mentioned regarding technology that it's almost, he called it, if I recall correctly, I think it was in Spirits of Darkness, where he called it a vehicle for possession. Mm-hmm. So it's the same idea where they huskify everyone. Like what you're saying, they turn them into egoless bodies, vessels primed for this singularized, collectivized, Ahrimanic force. And like what you're saying, the only way to fight against that is to think, it's to go beyond that. There was something I was reading from Steiner just recently, and I wanted to bring it up, where he states, let me get the quote. Yeah, this is in The Incarnation of Ahriman, The Embodiment of Evil on Earth, 7 lectures, and this is, I believe, pages 17 to 18. And he goes, quote, to gain a right conception of the historical evolution of mankind over approximately 6,000 years, and it's this idea that Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor of China 3,000 years ago, or in 3000 BC, was the incarnation of Lucifer. Then you had the Midland point, which was the incarnation of Christ. And then, of course, you'll have the Ahrimanic, or as Steiner predicted, you'll have the Ahrimanic scientistic deception that will be so vast, so all-encompassing, so pervasive, and it will be this sort of tyrant, this techno-tyrant. But he mentions one must grasp that at one pole stands an incarnation of Lucifer, in the center the incarnation of Christ, and at the other pole the incarnation of Ahriman. Lucifer is the power that stirs up all fanatical, all falsely mystical forces in human beings, all that physiologically tends to bring the blood into disorder and so lift man above and outside himself. Ahriman is the power that makes people dry, prosaic, Philistine, that ossifies them and brings them into the superstition of materialism. And this is exactly what we were discussing with that individual. You know, he can't see beyond the superstition of science, the superstition of the material. And the true nature and being of man is essentially the effort to hold the balance between the powers of Lucifer and Ahriman. The Christ impulse helps present humanity to establish the equilibrium. And then he mentions as well, Ahriman has the greatest possible interest in instructing men in mathematics, but not in instructing them that mathematical, mechanistic concepts of the universe are merely illusions. He is intensely interested in teaching us the concepts of chemistry, physics, biology, and so on, as they are presented today in all their remarkable effects, and in making us believe that they are absolute truths, not that they are only points of view, like photographs taken from one side. If you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a correct photograph, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree. If you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a true likeness, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree as can be gained from photographing it from four sides. Ahriman has the greatest interest in concealing from mankind that in modern intellectual rationalistic science, in superstitious empiricism, one is dealing with a great illusion, a deception, that men should not recognize this is of the greatest possible interest to Ahriman. It would be a triumphant experience for him if the scientific superstition, which infiltrates all areas of life today and which human beings even try to use as a template for the social sciences, should prevail into the third millennium. He would have the greatest success if he could then arrive in Western civilization in human form and find the scientific superstition as prevailing dogma. I mean, there's one thing he got wrong there. It won't be in human form. It will probably be in digital form. Most likely. Yeah.
Probably. But it's interesting, too, because I was just reading something similar to this last night. I was listening to the spoken lecture version of it. And regarding math and numbers, he's like, this is an illusion, and it is an illusion, and it's an illusion because, like, in the end, all you get from a number and from math, it's a means of comparison to something else. But that means of comparison means nothing if that something else doesn't exist, or if you don't know how to find the other that you're comparing it to, and especially if everything becomes a hive and you're all one at that point. You're just watching magic. You're watching an illusion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's very interesting, like what you were reading there, as I contemplate this. The idea of the etheric field, or the etheric structuring field, and the astral field, the quality imbuing field of energy, which is quality based, as opposed to the etheric field of thought that is structure based. And so we think of structure as being dry, empty forms. And we think of what fills that structure as being like a fluid substance of energy. So there we see that Luciferian fluid substance of energy. We could equate it to the astral field, the astral light. And then we could equate the Ahrimanic concept to the pure etheric field. And each one of themselves is like a polarity apart. So the left-hand path, the Ahrimanic field of matter, and the shape and the form behind matter, and the right-hand path, the energetic path of Lucifer, which is that that potential that can fill matter, but that potential which is based of light, which is based on the element of water, more so. There's moisture in it. I love the way, and where did that come from? What you were reading, Silas?
I think that was the spirits of darkness. I'll just get the quote actually.
From Steiner.
Oh no, sorry, it's the same book, The Incarnation of Ahriman, The Embodiment of Evil on Earth, 7 lectures. Yeah, it's from Steiner. It's from one of his lectures that was put into a sort of book form.
Yeah, definitely Steiner. Very interesting how that the dryness and the emptiness of the dryness is equated, and the other one is the fullness of the moisture. And moisture is more of a quality. If you think about what moisture represents, then when there's moisture on your skin's sensitive. When there's dryness, it's like sound doesn't travel very well when it's very dry, right? Because nothing really happens very much. If you were to get absolute humidity, and I mean like 0, right? Water, would sound be able to travel? What do you guys think? What an
No,
interesting
I don't.
concept.
Probably not.
I don't think it would. No, it would be completely muffled and muted at best.
So like the whole transference of potential has got to do with water. It's a very interesting concept when we really look at what water is. And the more when you're in the water, the sound's incredible, right? Like sound really travels through water. Like I remember being in Israel. I lived in a place called Chofak Zev. If you ever go to Israel, Chofak Zev, you got to nail that place. Oof. It's the best place to go in the whole of Israel. It was my backyard, that beach. It's a private beach. It was my place. I lived there like a year and a half. And it's so cool to have a whole beach as a home. Like this is my home, it's my beach. And so anyway, I remember being there and hearing this trance party and thinking, damn, people told me there was going to be a trance party somewhere, like some people I'd known, but I wasn't interested. And I was listening to the trance, the psychedelic trance over the water, the ocean. I thought, you know what? I'm going to take a walk and go find this party. And I walked and I walked and I walked. I don't even know how many miles, how many kilometers I walked. When I finally got to the party, I was like so disappointed. I was like, oh, this is like some like I thought there was like a proper big sound system out there. It was like people like really like having a party. And I'd walked like 10 kilometers because we were next to the sea. The sound had traveled over the water. And I walked forever without the sound getting louder. And then I noticed that the sound was getting softer. Oh, right, I'm walking away from the sea. And then I still had to keep going kilometers and kilometers. And then it started getting louder again when I was getting close to the water. So as the road meandered, it got louder and softer. And I realized that the sound was literally stuck on the water and being conducted over the edge of the water. Interesting phenomenon. So, and Israel, as you know, low humidity, desert.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the sound was actually pushed away from the low humidity. It was actually forced onto the water, compressed onto the water, almost in a sense. It's the feeling that I got. And I remember thinking to myself, this is the weirdest phenomenon I've ever seen, because I know water and sound. But so, yeah, I think like this idea of Ahriman representing the etheric field and the etheric field being very dry. Because what is dry humor? Dry humor is when you don't add any quality to it, right? You tell a joke, but you're not actually feeling the joke. Like you can't even laugh at the joke because it's not funny. Yeah, your humor's too dry.
The only thing that's interesting about this is how... So Steiner has Ahriman as the beast that comes from the sea. But I don't know if that's because by the sea he means also the abyss below. He could be meaning that. And it's like because Lucifer comes from the heavens. Because he's a more logical... he's a lesser evil than Ahriman.
Well, you have as well the Asuras and the Nagas were I'll have to get the quote for this. It's in. I literally just wrote it yesterday, but they state that this merchant elite were a maritime power, so perhaps it links with that. So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just looked that up, Franklin. Actually, it travels 4.3 times faster in water sound, which is extremely interesting. And also, as well, just thinking about it, water is almost like a shapeshifter, isn't it? It can be like a small, a drop of dew in the morning, but it can also turn into a raging tempest, a storm. And so again, it's that same sort of feminine principle that it can be extremely maternal and loving, but it can also be extremely dark. And both of them are similar because they're expansionary. What Mahakala did was expansionary because, well, firstly, she sort of educated Shiva that perhaps there was a force, of course it was time, that defeats all other things, is the great dissolver of things, even the gods, even the heavens. So that was a reminder. So that sort of knock on the nose, if you will, was something that was educational. There's something else to mention with water. It also exists in 3 states. So you have that sort of triality again. And if you look at what they're sort of discovering in CERN, now again, this may or may not be true. I just find it interesting as a narrative that quarks, which is part of this sort of, I guess you would call it subatomic structure of the world. Quarks are comprised of 3 colors that they've found, which is very interesting because you look at our macrocosm compared to that microcosm, and
What
you
3
see, of
colors?
course, I forget them now, but it's certainly it's 3 colors that they're all usually comprised of, and in the combination of those 3, of course, like in our own world, will produce it will produce a mixture of colors, all the colors under the sun. And of course, even with the colors, with the white and the black in the center, you will have a subtractive and additive color mixing. So it's you've got that same duality with the triality. So it's really it's the geometry of the world, basically, isn't it? It's a sort of maybe they're dealing with geomancy on a. I mean, what they're dealing with is a multidisciplinary science. That's
Well,
what these people have
the
touched upon.
the crystalline, I guess, technology, I guess you would call it. I mean, that's very Atlantean. Like that's like how what's his name? Casey described the what was that stone called? The Tuatoa or something like that. Tutoa. I think it was spelled, but it was like some people thought it was the lapis lazuli stone, but it was like a crystal. And he said this was the energy source for the Atlantean dark magicians that eventually destroyed their society with it. And Steiner basically says the same thing, just minus telling us what the energy source was.
Yes, Edgar Casey was the individual who wrote that book, The Akashic Records, wasn't it? Yeah. I do recall him mentioning that. So there was another thing that I came across regarding that sort of crystalline technology, but it's exactly what we're doing now with chipboards. So I think it's silicon dioxide that we use. We take it, it comes in a sort of mineral form, then we break it up, and we put it in these patterns. We process it into these patterns of sort of almost sigils, right? They're almost magical sigils. And then we enchant it with electricity, the energy of the cosmos. And then we demand that it thinks for us. So it's very Solomonic in that regard. We're almost using sigils to control this energy, to modulate the frequency of the energy, or however one wants to put it. So basically, it is a form of magic. It's similar to what I guess the Atlanteans were doing with crystalline technology. but it's in a more sort of concealed and hidden sense. But ultimately, if you look at computer technology, we have broken apart rocks, enchanted them vis-a-vis lightning, and then demanded that they think on our behalf. I mean, it's so mad when you think of it that way. And of course, if you were to show any of this technology and these chipsets and these chipboards to the ancients, they would quite rightly state that, you know, we're dealing with or we're trying to control powers that are perhaps not altogether good. And it's that notion: is there a ghost in the machine?
Yeah. And the one thing too, Casey said, was that like the technology would basically control, like they had like a large crystal cut in a certain way. I think it was 8-sided or 12, I can't remember if you said 8 or 12-sided, but it would like control, like almost like a Tesla tower would control like wirelessly things that were flying, boats that were on the water. So it was, I mean, it's exactly like what they're creating now.
Yeah, I think this we're really onto like the money here, because this really brings us back to like the point. Like the crystal, we've got the crystalline cells I was talking about last week, 2 places in our body where there's a particular type of crystalline cell that generates light. Now we obviously got in our ears, which I wasn't actually aware of. Thanks for that, KB. That's fascinating. But the ones in our pineal and in our behind our eyes are like a triangular crystalline cell. I think it goes back to a time when we were beings on another order of life. Like there's a time when we were crystalline beings. What a concept. And then we were like a small little thing, like a crystal that evolved to become. Yeah, here we go. So it's an interesting potential and a concept to sort of look at. And what you were talking about as well earlier, what was it? Let me try and retrace my steps. Silas, you said something really interesting. Both of you are actually feeding into it. I think it comes back to this whole idea of this Ahrimanic potential that coming from the waters, right? Yes, I think it was you that said it, Chris. Ahriman coming from the waters and Lucifer coming from the skies. It stands to reason that the water would expel that which is the opposite of it.
Yeah.
And the sky would expel that which is the opposite of it.
Yeah, no, that makes
So
sense.
the sky represents dryness. It would expel rain. And if the water represents wetness, it would expel bubbles of dryness, of pure oxygen.
Yeah, no.
So is it pure oxygen that comes out of the water, breathed out by the beings in the water? Especially like most of the beings in the water. Well, it used to be, were those little phytoplankton. I think there was the biggest population in the ocean. And so like it used to generate 80% of our oxygen, right? Was it 70% something of our oxygen?
Large
I was at school. Now it's what? 50%? 50, 60? Like things have changed in the last 30 years, 40, 35, 40 years, whatever it is, since I was in school, because I remember the numbers being 70% or 70-something percent.
Something high, something large.
I saw David Attenborough the other day. And what did he say it was? What percentage of oxygen generated by oceans? I think it's like 50-something percent. And I was like, yeah. Okay, so now it says 50 to 80%. No, it says 50%. So it's important to remember that although the ocean produces at least 50% of the oxygen on Earth, roughly the same amount is consumed by marine life. You see, that to me doesn't add up.
Mhm.
because we were taught in school that it was an abundance created by the ocean, and that what was the abundance was created was actually added to our on the land beings. But we have taken most of the whales out of the picture, and the whales are what keep the carnivorous plankton in check because of the size of their feeding holes. The phytoplankton goes right through the sieve, so they survive. But the carnivorous plankton that eats the phytoplankton, they're bigger and they get caught in the whales. So the whales are actually the filtering machines for the ocean that go around cleaning the ocean in order to ensure the balance is a highly oxygenated ocean. And we had these red tide here a while ago. I don't know if you get them in California.
We get the
It was
blue.
shocking.
We get the blue.
I've never seen anything like it before in my life. I mean, I've known red tide since I was a little boy. I used to go fishing with my dad.
Yeah, we get
And I was on the mountain and I could see the red tides, like the entire coastline.
we get like a
Red,
bioluminescence, but it's blue.
Red. You couldn't swim anywhere.
Yeah,
was that, Chris?
we get a bioluminescence, but it's blue.
Interesting.
It's some sort of plankton. I actually have some in the other room. You could feed them. They're like a bacteria or something, and when you shake it, they light up. But they're not safe to swim in. At least I don't think you're supposed to.
Are you sure about that?
I'm not positive.
I mean, I remember have you ever tried breakdancing in that, guys? You go in the water and you're like breakdance. These little lights everywhere. It's quite fun. Hey. You feel like you're on fire, you're dancing, and you got these little lights streaming around your body as the water's streaming off. You come out of the water breakdancing.
It probably is fine.
Well, you if you get a cut on your finger, on your toe in that luminescent water, you get infection very fast. And once infection gets in, you've got to work hard to remove it. It's not a laughing matter. So I would say that they're probably not safe if you're going to get injured. But if you don't get any cut on your toe or your finger, you're good to go.
What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. There's something else I wanted to bring up. I don't know if you saw the private chat, Franklin. I'm going to have to get out of here in like 7 minutes. But before I go, there was something else Steiner said about all of this. And it was kind of like the solution. And part of it was you can't fight it. Like you need the forces. You need the Ahrimanic and Luciferic forces that are going to be incoming. But it's like you have to balance them, as you were saying before, Franklin, and as Silas was saying as well. Both of you guys were saying this, or at least hinting at it, that you have to balance the forces instead of reject them. But Steiner also said that some people would start to have this ability to control machines, which I did not know here. I did not know this was something he said. I thought maybe he had said this once or twice, but I wasn't positive if he was talking about this was like going to be part of the Ahrimanic trick. But no, he was like the people who manage to balance the forces somehow will gain an ability to control machines without like some sort of implant or anything like that. There will be no extra electromagnetic devices hooked up to you. It'll just be a natural thing. Almost like literally in the Matrix when they show that one scene where Neo's outside of the Matrix in the machine world and he can destroy the machines because he has some sort of link to the machines, but minus the link. Like it's just going to be a thing. And that's how apparently he thinks those who stay human and who stay on that middle path are going to make it through.
There was something.
Sorry,
Frank,
do continue.
No, I was just going to say as well, just something really quickly while it's still on my mind with the crystals as well. If you look at Masonic symbolism, they use the stellated octahedron, if I'm correct. It's basically a three-dimensional hexagram. And I've always wondered, of course there's semiotics surrounding this and what it means esoterically, but are they attempting to philosophize something that is actually a technical technology? Something that is actually, perhaps they had drawings and technical drawings of that they had no idea what they were, so they built up this weird, almost techno religion surrounding it, where they philosophized these things that perhaps they were too primitive to understand at that time, or just after the reset as well. I just want to add that. I'm probably going to have to dip as well, guys. I have to head out and walk the dog.
This was a fast one tonight, even though we were still on for almost 2 hours, which is crazy. It always seems so fast.
We did say we were going to do it within the 2-hour band, and we started way late.
Yeah.
The thing that I would add here is the difference between the Ida and the Pingala and the etheric and the astral. The etheric is linked to our central nervous system, as I see it, which is the Pingala, and the astral is linked to our endocrine hormonal system, as I see it, the emotional system, which is Ida. And so the pineal gland is where this crystal is that generates light inside the head. So that crystal gives us an insight. Now that's Araman, according to this model that I'm like sort of thinking about Araman as the etheric. That
But
means
that if you think of that's what Arman's trying to control, then it's ours. Just it's trying to be the way. How would you gain control over that? You'd be working on like exactly like what Steiner said. Try to control your dreams. Basically, that's the state. The space you should be working the most is your dream space. That would make sense.
The technology is trying to affect our pineal, like you say. Then there's a feedback loop, because once I had to intervene with my ex-wife being abducted astrally or etherically, and I managed to short out all of their technology just through focusing deeply into like a single point and allowing that point to sort of extend from me. And that created a standing wave that shorted out all of the technology in her hand. Like these were these ant beings. I told the story before, right? You know. So that like something that always stuck with me. Like how did that happen? How was I able to cause that reaction? And my wife saw it happen. Ex-wife saw it happen. She was on the earth watching us. Like I was up next to the craft, so up like in high altitude. And so, she had a lot to say about that too. She was like, how did you do that? Like, what did you do? How? She was curious, in how, and I was like, I don't know how I did it. But I think it's really interesting how this crystal inside our head could possibly be the key to us controlling the Aramanic forces. And I think that's a good point to sort of,
absolutely
to take us to right here. And dear brother, you got to go fetch your girlfriend.
Absolutely, brother. But I think that's a great spot to stop right now and then come back to it next week. I think that's an awesome point.
Well,
awesome
drive
point.
safe. Take it easy.
Absolutely, brother. Everyone take care. Thank you for joining us. Sorry for the late start. Next week we will start back on time.
Don't forget to smile.
Yeah, brother. I'll talk with you soon, bro. It was good seeing you, man. You too, brother.
Big love. So I will just continue for the last sort of 14, 15 minutes or so, looking at how this sort of crystalline part of the inside of our consciousness is the inside of our brain is rooting our consciousness through the pineal gland. I think that's food for thought when it comes to all of these drones, when it comes to all of these AI systems that are going to be linking and routing through all of these very intense pieces of technology that are being developed, and how a lot of people might end up getting plugged into the Neuralink systems one way or another, whether it's through invasive arm prick adventures like the 2020 games that we saw. Sorry to call it games. A lot of people lost a lot of dear people in those nasty games. But trying to keep the algorithms happy, as it were. I do think that there's a lot to be understood when it comes to the way in which technology works. I've had a lot of experiences in my life with technology and myself that is very hard to explain. And now that I think about it, the silicon basis of technology and the silicon basis through which the electrical system of the human consciousness and the central nervous system works seem to be very much linked, seem to work in the same fashion. In fact, even very similar way of operation. The only difference is where our algorithms in our neurological system might be like a few hertz, not such high hertz, although our DNA is resonating at, I think, between 1.7 gigahertz and 4.7 or 3.7 gigahertz. So that 3.7 to 1.7 gigahertz resonance of our DNA is pretty much in sync with the vibrational resonance of our modems, our computers, our phones, laptops, tablets, and all of that, which I think is quite interesting. It's like they're trying to affect the frequencies of our DNA by the standing wave frequencies created by all the various pieces of technology around us that are peaking at certain resonance peak frequencies, obviously creating standing waves that are going to bring out certain DNA responses due to the DNA resonant field having that particular vibratory frequency. There's a lot to be looked at here, and the way in which the frequency is modulated by the crystal. And the crystal is obviously the way in which we can sort of influence our central nervous system through our thought, which is why yoga is so powerful, why we're able to shift our consciousness, shift our body, shift our mind, why using a drum puts us in a trance, and we go into the trance with the drum, and that sort of causes us to get to that sort of dizzy feeling where we feel our body sort of slipping away, and we're able to sort of float off and go on an out of the body excursion. I think a lot of this has got to do with changing the frequencies on the crystal. So I think we've really come to a really important point of recognizing what the Aramanic structure represents, the etheric field, which is all a crystalline, the sacred geometry of life, also representing the structure and form of the neurological system as it is frequencies controlled by the crystal. And I don't believe we have a crystal in the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is resonating on a different frequency. The hormones, I think, are resonating at a much lower frequency. I can't remember the frequency of hormones, but it could be closer to the frequency of the neurological system. I think hormones might be between like a half hertz and 4 or 5 hertz, if memory serves. So it's very fascinating to me to really realize how powerful these little crystals are. I mean, I'm never far from crystals. I have a great and deep, incredible love of crystals. I've always got them near to me. I'm always holding them. And I find that if you hold on to a crystal for a while, you can pick up on its frequency. And if you feel its frequency, it's got like its own sort of pulse rate, like a vibratory rate. You can sort of hold that frequency in your mind, and it starts to cause your whole body to get that vibratory frequency in your body. So it's interesting how we can interface with crystals just using our thoughts, even at a distance. I can sit here now and I can interface with a crystal in the other side of the house. And interestingly enough, if you go away from the house and you interface with a crystal at a distance, you can actually make a connection with the place where you are. I've got a beautiful crystal that I love that went into the ocean. And sometimes I interface with her in the sea and I pick up all the marine currents. And I was really sad when I'd lost her in the ocean. But then I realized, hold on, this is a doorway into the marine world. And so there's a lot to be said about crystals and consciousness, crystals and thought, crystals in the way in which our mind is organizing the structures that we've become accustomed to in the belief patterns that will actually give us the emphasis, the ability to put one thought over another to construct thought forms. And these thought forms will then be able to be utilized and used towards understanding, where the impulsive, intuitive state of the emotional consciousness seems to be much more of a pure interface. I am one with what I'm connecting with. That distinction of separation seems to be completely possible due to the polarizing effects of crystals. And so if crystals are polarizing, that polarity being brought into focus, it says a lot about its connection to the solar vehicle being that which puts out the electrical photons and the magnetic, the waves. And sort of, I think that our very gravitational field is structured by the light of the sun. that the light of the sun is the light of the one, and the light of the one is the light of the soul. So the soul is the sun is the soul. I don't think these words are consequentially random. I believe that every word has a place, and that there's no accidents to the way in which this world sort of structures thought and information. And I also relate all ideas and all words to coming from a onomatopoeic source. So everything seems to be of pure onomatopoeia. In fact, where I am, the Khoisan Xhosa pre-descendants. So we've got the Xhosa people here in Cape Town at the moment, which has got some element of the San people or the Khoi people, or what we call traditionally the Khoisan people. These are the Bushmen of the Western Cape, highly evolved, spiritualized human beings that were able to survive at oneness with nature. Didn't have words for theft, didn't have words for war, didn't have such a thing as war or theft, because they didn't own possessions. They couldn't understand when the white man came and they were like, these are my bulls. They were like, what do you mean it's your bulls? I shot the bull with my arrow. Now it's mine. I'm taking it to my family to eat it. And so unfortunately, this caused a lot of war, both between the Xhosa groups and the white groups here that arrived, and there was an extinction of sorts that occurred with the Khoisan people. But they have been inducted into what we call here in Cape Town the colored population, which is a mixed population of all different races, but rich Khoisan indigenous blood within it. Wonderful people, exciting, intelligent, funny as you can ever imagine, with an intense love of jazz. How cool is that? So jazz is thriving here in Cape Town for any of you that want to come. But I do think that there's a lot to be learned from the way in which we interact with nature, and the way in which we can understand this psychic spiritual connection that our brains have with animals. Because if everything in its brain has a pineal gland, all mammals, let's just think this through for a moment. This is suddenly an explanation for why telepathy works, because the crystals in our heads are pinging out frequencies. And so you can modulate the frequencies of your algorithms of your brain using a crystal, right? This is what crystals are used for. They're used for lasers, they're used for radios, they're used for your phones. All technology relies upon these crystals. So we might have understood sort of the physical mechanics behind telepathy and behind telekinetic abilities, basically warping the electrical field through the crystal in order to affect the electrical field around you. And through affecting the electrical field around you, you can affect matter. And so it causes us to question what gravity is, what matter is, what magnetism is, how all of these things work. So anyway, there's a few of my thoughts that I thought I'd leave you with. We are getting to the 2-hour mark. 2 hours is definitely what we decided we would do, no more. Unfortunately, these days of our weeks are very, very, very difficult for us to be here. Silas wakes up very early to be here, and Chris is up till late. So I'm sending you all big love. I hope you enjoyed the show. Next week, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation where we're going to be looking at awakening. Awakening as it relates to the Great Reset. And so it's going to be both looking at the personal, the internal aspects of the spiritual awakening as it relates to these balancing of the forces of the Ahrimanic and the Luciferian forces, as it relates to what's happening on a worldly level with the Great Reset that's been pushed onto us by, those financial capitalists that we could equate to being the bad guys effectively. So yeah, we've got an interesting show for you guys next week. And I think we might look at what time we're going to do next week. It's probably going to be the same time, but a little bit earlier. So next week we'll probably be here, same place, same gig, 15 minutes earlier. Otherwise, I'm sending you all big love, big blessings, peace, honor, and respect. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Take it easy, keep smiling, and remember, life is short. It's what you make of it that counts. Bam Shiva, Shiva Shankar Bhagavan Namaha, Namo Narayana, Narayana Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. This is the Bush Whisperer signing off. If you haven't taken a look at my channel, I've got some wonderful workshop that's free, 108 lectures, which is coming from a shamanic perspective, putting into context the Hermetic tradition and the Kabbalist tradition and the Vedic tradition, and bringing the principles that are inherent in all three of these spiritual developing traditions into a single bite-sized chunk. So they're 10-minute lectures. If you're interested, go and take a look. They start from the ground up, building from the base level, which is Bush Whisperer Speaks Season 1, 108 lectures. Bush Whisperer Speaks Season 2 is 108 lectures. They are working from lecture 1 through, so a lot of the concepts are going to be added to as we go through the lectures. And Season 2 is going a little bit more deeply into the occult spiritual elements of it. First we start with the base, then we move it up, and then from there Season 3 is 72 lectures. Those are longer lectures. That's half-an-hour lectures. I haven't quite finished Season 3 yet. I do have them going into the Patreon for now, and that's going to be obviously much more deep diving, heavy occult notions being brought in. But once again, they work succinctly from each other, building up, and there's a powerful shamanic flavor to everything. Sending you all big love, big blessings. Take it easy. Keep smiling. Om Shanti.